I thought it might be helpful to show you guys around in my greenhouse and show you kind of what's going on at home here and on my front, and give you kind of a show and tell of what some of the things I've been talking about. So this is my greenhouse, and we built this earlier in the winter with UV resistant PVC pipes and steel ground posts, and then pressure treated lumber and plywood framing for the ends. And it cost us about $600 and a bit of time to put it together, but it's held up really well to the strong tornado-like conditions. Luckily, we didn't get any tornadoes directly here, but the winds were pretty high. So it's been pretty stable, and the plastic I'm using is your standard 6 mil greenhouse plastic, but it's got a reinforced fiber mesh to it, so that kind of helps against tearing. So I've used the regular 6 mil plastic before without the mesh reinforcement, and it has torn badly and really taken a beating through over the season. Even though it's supposed to last a couple of years, I didn't have great success with it, so I'm trying this and hoping it does a little bit better. And this is my potting table where I've germinated most of my seedlings, and what I've got going now in flats is, let's just give you a little peek here. So I've got some cucumbers and okra. I've got yellow squash and zucchini. I've got tomatoes and peppers. I've got both hot and sweet peppers and a handful of varieties of tomatoes. And I started the tomatoes and peppers first a couple of weeks ago, and I germinated them using some germination mats that I've got, and they're right here. Just keeps the temperature kind of stable in here, even when it gets low at night. The temperatures get low. But now I don't need them anymore because the temperatures are getting stable, and obviously they're all germinated. They're all up and they're holding steady. So, and then just recently, this past week, the cucumbers and squashes have popped up. And I'm just going to keep them in the greenhouse for a couple of weeks, at a maximum really, before I take them out to the main garden and plant them in the ground. Cucumbers and squashes, they don't like being transplanted when they get big, so I don't want to keep them in pots any longer than they have to be, but I did want to give them a little bit of a head start. And then once I put them in the ground, I'm going to keep them covered with row cover, floating above using 9-gauge wire hoops to keep the row cover off the plants. And by that time it should be warm enough, and the row cover should give a little added protection to those plants. Plus, I'm going to do the same thing with the tomatoes and peppers in a couple of weeks, once they've gotten a little bit taller and a little bit thicker, and added some extra main leaves. And those are going to go in the ground directly and then have row cover on them. And this kind of is like a hybrid hardening off process. So instead of taking them outside every day to get some direct sunlight and some, get used to the conditions out there, I'm going to take them out into I've got the doors open every day, and, they're doing pretty well in here, but they do need to be acclimated a little bit. So I'm going to take them out and put them in the garden, and with the row cover, that adds a little bit extra protection until they get used to it out there. So it helps reduce the transplant shock, and protects them from getting nibbled when they're little. So that's what I've got going on, and at least in flats. And then I've also got some peas and some radishes and lettuce and some Asian greens And right here I've got an example of really one of the pea trellises that's working the way it's supposed to, and it's just bamboo stakes in a sort of triangular, like a teepee fashion, and then they're tied to the greenhouse hoops just to give them a little bit of stability. And then I just recently planted some beans to go along with them, and they've popped up really fast. And I've also put a couple of sort of experimental squash and zucchini plants directly into the ground, and they've germinated quite well, actually. And so, oops. Those are going to be my earliest batch, and I'll get a production from them in the greenhouse, and then my next succession of those will be the ones that I planted in flats. And then after those are in the ground, I'll seed some directly into the ground, and that'll be my third succession of summer squash. So I'm getting as much production as I can that way. And if you don't have a greenhouse, if you're planting your summer crops in flats inside and putting them in front of a window, you can do the same kind of things I'm doing right now. Those tomatoes and peppers and summer squash and cucumbers and okra, those heat-loving summer crops, and this gives them a little bit of a head start rather than, waiting to put them in the ground. I have a hunch that it's warm enough outside, obviously not today, but it will be very soon, to start putting those tomato, pepper, cucumber seeds directly in the ground, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you have some form of at least minor protection over them, either some plastic or some row cover, just to insulate them a little bit and protect them while they're young. Otherwise I'd wait a little bit, maybe a couple weeks before putting them directly in the ground. But obviously at this time you can directly seed any cool season crops like lettuce, spinach, kale, chard, any Asian greens, anything that germinates under cool temperatures and will enjoy this spring weather, as well as spring onions and root vegetables like carrots, radishes, turnips, beets, things like that. Those can go directly in the ground, as well as peas. And if you're growing your summer babies like mine, inside in front of a window, make sure that window is south facing. You're going to get the most sun that way. And also make sure that you're taking them out on really nice days so just for a little field trips, so they can get acclimated to the temperature. And also this gives them a little extra direct sunlight, because seedlings grown indoors can sometimes get a little leggy because they're not getting enough light in front of the window. But now that the weather is relatively nice outside, you can take them outside for field trips and they can get a little extra, and you can help with this legginess that way. And then in a couple of weeks, once they get a little bit bigger, you could wait longer, you could wait up to 6 weeks before transplanting, but in a couple of weeks it ought to be warm enough for you to transplant those summer babies directly into the ground. So I hope that you guys are doing well and having fun with the beginning of your planting season, and I'll keep you up to date at what's going on here, so stay tuned.